The briefing room fell silent as the colonel dismissed her suggestion with a wave of his hand. Too quiet to lead, he muttered to his aides, barely glancing at the notes she'd passed forward. Hours before the team moved out, her pencil had circled a single vulnerability in the enemy's Overwatch positions, a gap others missed, but she saw clearly. Her warning was ignored. When the extraction mission unraveled in a sudden ambush from that same position, every head turned toward the woman who had been listening in the shadows. If you've ever watched your insights go unrecognized because you kept quiet, share your story below. Captain Elena Vasquez took her usual seat at the far end of the mission planning table, her standard issue notebook already open to a fresh page. Around her, officers bent over maps, tracing broad lines for assault routes and marking positions with colored pens. Their voices overlapped in the harshly lit room, each one pushing for their own plan, eager to be heard above the rest. Elena focused on her notepad, sketching out two critical details: the eastward slope no one else accounted for, and the inevitable supply bottleneck at the valley's entrance. Her shorthand symbols mapped where enemy patrols would intersect with their movement and where visibility would drop at dawn. She cross-referenced these with the patrol schedules she'd memorized, quietly calculating how quickly each team could move before running into resistance. A lieutenant jabbed at the map, insisting on a northern approach under smoke cover, frontal assault, textbook, and predictable. The colonel nodded, already convinced. Elena paused, pencil hovering, as she compared their optimistic timelines with the latest enemy patrol patterns. She considered speaking, but the memory of last month's reprimand for questioning a superior's timing still lingered. The cost had been a week of extra duty, and the lesson was clear. Major Halsey slapped the table, declaring the weather would be clear for insertion, night optics unimpeded. Elena made a quiet checkmark next to her note about sudden cold fronts, a pattern she'd confirmed from years of weather data. She knew the risk, but her research stayed in the margins. Final plans due in 15, the colonel announced. The officers scrambled, making small tweaks to the same basic plan. Elena watched as the same blind spots, especially the eastern slope, and the choke point at the supply drop remained unaddressed. She added timestamps to her notes, marking exactly when and where those flaws would become problems during the op. Her hand hovered over the red folder in her bag, the one with her alternative route mapped, annotated, and tested in simulation. She hesitated, then closed her notebook and pressed her palms to the table. Across the room, Corporal Mitch caught her eye, giving a slight shake of his head. Elena exhaled, staying put as others lined up to submit their proposals. The colonel approved a plan nearly identical to the original, with only minor adjustments. Elena sat through the final briefing, watching as the projector displayed the same vulnerabilities she'd identified, now cast in sharp relief on the screen. She memorized the team assignments, noting which squads would be exposed first when the timing failed. When the room emptied, Elena lingered, her notebook left behind on purpose. The cleaning crew found it the next morning open to a page with 2 diagrams and a list of failure points. At the bottom, a single line in her tight script. All preventable. As the first reports came in, the insertion team missed their extraction window by 19 minutes, exactly as she'd predicted. She waited in the quiet that followed, knowing someone would have to see what she'd seen. Elena approached Lieutenant Cho at the intelligence station, the hum of cooling fans filling the otherwise empty room. She placed a finger on the monitor, outlining a jagged line along the eastern ridge. The surveillance sweeps missed these crevices, she said quietly. Enemy can hide spotters here, full concealment from our optics. Cho zoomed in on the coordinates, shaking his head. Our LiDAR scans from last week show every formation. No movement, no heat signatures. The ridge is clear. He tapped through overlays, confident in the uniform blue wash of the thermal images. Without arguing, Elena opened her tablet and pulled up black and white photographs from 5 years earlier, aligning them beside the current LiDAR scans. The rock formations matched, but the old images revealed deep, overhangs natural bunkers where the new scans showed only smoothed surfaces filled with debris. She pointed to the shadow patterns. The debris is camouflage. The structure underneath hasn't changed. The thermal masking is basic layered basalt, absorbs heat during the day and cools at night, matching ambient temperatures. She referenced a geological survey on her screen. They used this exact method in Ghazni province. Same rock type, same tactic. Cho dismissed her with a single line. Command won't divert resources for anomalies based on old photos, Captain. He turned back to his screens, ending the exchange. Back at her workstation, Elena began pulling every Eastern Ridge surveillance image from the past 8 years, 73 files in all. She cross-referenced them against the latest LiDAR and thermal scans working through the night. Patterns emerged. Subtle, consistent gaps in coverage where the rock faces angled sharply inward. The thermal data was identical across all missions, regardless of season or time of day, an impossibility for natural terrain. She annotated 17 image pairs, highlighting the concealed bunkers, and wrote a concise analysis explaining the contrast between the archival photos and current scans. At 345, she submitted her report through standard channels. The system logged her credentials and sorted the submission into a low-priority review queue, buried beneath routine terrain updates. By 1,600 the next afternoon, Bravo Company's lead element took fire from the Eastern Ridge, exactly 38 meters northwest of the coordinates Elena had flagged. Enemy positions exploited the natural overhangs. She'd identified stone baffles that absorbed outgoing signatures and scattered incoming sensors. 2 medevacs launched within the hour, their lights flashing against the same ridge that had appeared empty on every drone run. In the aftermath, Elena sat in the logistics annex, her tablets glow the only light in the cramped space. The numbers never matched the optimism of Command's projections. Elena compared the mission's supply allocations to historical data from similar operations missions that had run short in the past when resistance was heavier and the terrain less forgiving than anticipated. The official tables assumed smooth progress, minimal enemy contact, and perfect weather. Elena recalculated for delays at the extraction point and the impact of night movement through steep passes, factoring in the extra weight of protective gear and the likelihood of drawn-out firefights. Her scenarios all pointed to a clear risk. The team would need more ammunition and water than listed. Before dawn, she carried her revised tables to the logistics office. Captain Ruiz skimmed the first page, frowning. "You're inflating the numbers. We use standard rates for a reason." He gestured to the open manual on his desk, the same guidelines every officer cited. Elena pointed out that those rates reflected flat terrain and daylight advances, not night climbs under fire. She pulled up after-action summaries. Previous units had run short when conditions shifted, sometimes by nearly 40%. Ruiz waved off the data. "We can't plan for every worst case. Extra weight slows everyone down." He signed off on the original request, ignoring her additional figures. Insertion day brought changes Command hadn't planned for. The landing zone shifted higher up the slope, forcing the team into a longer, steeper approach. Water ran low before first contact. Some operators ditched non-essential gear to lighten their packs, including spare ammunition Elena had listed as critical. Hours later, enemy patrols harassed their advance. Rifle magazines emptied faster than the plan allowed. By the 12th hour, calls for status updates grew tense. At the 16th, Elena's fire team reached their last reserve crates precisely where her calculations had warned they'd run dry. When Command's drop landed far off target, the team wasted critical minutes under fire, exactly as Elena's tables had warned. The after-action report blamed unexpectedly high ammunition expenditure for the delay, but no one referenced her analysis. Her supply tables sat in Ruiz's outbox, dismissed as overcautious. 3 days later, packing lists arrived with a quiet adjustment. Ammunition loads increased by 20%, presented as Ruiz's own field-tested calculation. Elena watched the team leaders praise the change, her expression tight. She recorded the update in the margins of her original report, noting that her numbers had finally been adopted without acknowledgement. The frustration lingered, a silent echo beneath her steady work. The quartermaster, sorting old files, found her tables stamped with a date 48 hours before the failed insertion. He slipped them into the active folder for future missions. When Elena submitted her next logistics request, It passed through without question. On the following deployment, the team returned with a margin of ammunition that matched her projections. Ruiz signed off her inventory list without looking up. Patterns emerged in the silence her work recognized, but never credited aloud. The lessons from missed calculations and ignored warnings pressed at the edges of every operation. As Elena prepared for the next assignment, she turned her attention to the radio logs and patrol schedules, looking for the next gap command would overlook. Patterns had always revealed themselves to Elena long before others noticed. Over 6 nights in the surveillance outpost, she tracked enemy radio traffic, logging every shift and movement along Sector 7. By the 3rd evening, her notebook showed a rhythm that didn't fit command's assumptions. Enemy patrols weren't random, nor did they follow the expected 24-hour cycle. They moved on a strict 38-hour rotation, overlapping day and night shifts, leaving no true gap in coverage. She checked her findings against months of archived logs. The pattern held every patrol change, resupply run, and sniper repositioning aligned with this uncommon timing. 12 times, the enemy had reinforced positions precisely 30 minutes ahead of Allied assaults. Command dismissed these as unlucky breaks or leaks. Elena saw the system underneath. She submitted her analysis, concise and direct, highlighting the 38-hour patrol cycle and the precise windows of vulnerability. Her findings included mapped routes and lunar phase overlays, showing how moonlight influenced patrol speed. There was no urgency marker, just facts and predictions. The report was filed away, deprioritized. Within days, Major Hale led Charlie Company into Sector 7, relying on intelligence that claimed the enemy would be mid-shift at 1,400, supposedly the perfect time to strike. Elena listened to the operations radio feed. At 1,355, the patrol point was empty. The team advanced, expecting a gap. At 1,417, concealed enemy positions opened fire from the high rocks. The ambush came from the exact coordinates Elena had flagged as likely reinforcement zones. In the first minutes, Charlie Company suffered 7 casualties. The rapid loss and confusion echoed through the comms as Hale's team scrambled for cover and medevac birds rushed to the scene. The mission's cost was measured in blood, not just missed predictions. After-action reports blamed unanticipated enemy readiness. Faulty intelligence was cited, with no mention of Elena's warning or its timestamp. She retrieved her original analysis, now archived, and added the ambush data time stamped, matching her predictions to the minute. She printed copies, one for the suggestion box, one slipped under the senior analyst's door, and one for her own locker. 17 days later, scouts noticed the enemy had shifted to a 32-hour patrol cycline, apparent disruption. Only Elena recognized the significance. The change aligned exactly with 16 cycles of their old system, matching the timeline from her report. It wasn't random, it was calculated adaptation. She updated her findings with the new variables and delivered them by hand to the general's aide. The next morning, reconnaissance drones confirmed fresh enemy fighting positions at 4 of her predicted sites. Artillery probes on the remaining coordinates triggered secondary explosions ammunition caches, right where her analysis suggested. No one credited Elena when the next company moved through Sector 7 without incident. The major summary simply noted, improved intelligence correlation, while new patrol charts, built on her data, circulated without her name. She watched the briefing from the back, silent as the moon phase calculations were misstated. She made a quiet note of the error, then turned to a clean page, preparing for what others would overlook in the next operation. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead marked the start of another long night. Preparation for the mountains began when others were still debating routes. Elena worked alone in the armory, her focus narrowing to the 2 adjustments that would matter most once the air thinned and the weather turned. She broke down her rifle's scope, cleaning each lens and gear, then dialed the elevation turret a quarter turn past regulation 0. The manual settings stopped at 0 meters, but the maps showed their landing site at 3,400. She logged the change, noting the predicted shift in point of impact, and tested her solution at the range the next morning. The first 3 rounds landed left of center. She corrected for wind and, by the 6th shot, her groupings closed tight. No one asked about the extra steps. The range officer glanced at her target and moved on. In her rucksack, Elena packed 3 additional sets of batteries for her night vision goggles. The logistics officer insisted the standard issue supply would last 72 hours, but Elena had measured battery life during winter exercises and knew the cold would drain them in half that time. She kept the extras sealed in a waterproof pouch, tucked beside her medical kit where they would stay dry and accessible. The night before deployment, Elena reviewed her maintenance log. She checked every piece of gear for wear, replaced a frayed strap, and reapplied anti-fog solution to her optics. She folded a lightweight poncho and slid it beneath her plate carrier, aware that mountain weather rarely matched the forecast. Her notebook held 6 months of meteorological data, and she saw the pattern, a 60% chance of precipitation when the jet stream shifted. She made a note to warn the others, but kept the poncho for herself. On insertion day, the team loaded onto the helicopters under clear skies. Sergeant Cole laughed as he saw Elena's pack. "Vasquez, you planning to camp out here all winter?" She said nothing, securing her rifle and checking the batteries once more. 12 hours later, the weather turned. Freezing rain swept down, icing optics and soaking gear. Elena's scope stayed clear. She'd treated the lenses days before. Others wiped at the glass, smearing moisture across their view. As night fell and the temperature dropped, the first night vision units blinked out. Corporal Reyes cursed as his display died. Elena handed him a fresh set of batteries, already warmed in her pocket to preserve their charge. When Cole's radio failed in the sleet, Elena passed him her own modified unit. The connection held, and the team's link to command stayed open. No one commented on the difference, but they kept her gear close at hand for the rest of the mission. By extraction, half the team had borrowed from Elena's reserves batteries, poncho, anti-fog wipes. The maintenance crew later found moisture damage in most radios, but Elena's worked perfectly. Her scope required no recalibration. The checklist for the next mission included a new line. All personnel verify altitude Z settings on optical devices. No explanation. Elena read the addition, then turned to her notes for the next briefing, already outlining the terrain's less obvious risks. She traced the valley's contour lines, her finger pausing at a narrow blue streak that most would overlook. When the team gathered for route planning, Elena waited for a pause in the debate before offering a direct alternative. "Canyon insertion here," she said, pointing to the map. Major Halsey dismissed her with a glance. "That's a death funnel. Too easy to ambush." Sergeant Cole scoffed. "May as well paint a target on our backs." Their attention returned to the ridge approach, ignoring the data she'd compiled. Elena's analysis was thorough. Geological surveys showed the canyon's rock walls would muffle sound and block line of sight. Thermal scans confirmed the floor stayed cooler than the open ground, making detection by drone unlikely. Enemy patrol logs revealed a pattern. The canyon remained unentered for months, even during major sweeps. She had recent drone footage tracks, no debris, no sign of IEDs. Still, the officers stuck to protocol, citing old risks and dismissing her evidence as outdated. The chosen route forced the team through 2 river crossings and skirted within a few hundred meters of a known bunker complex. Elena marked 3 likely minefields along the path in her notebook, based on historical placement and satellite imagery. She kept her observations to herself. 40 minutes into the movement, the first explosion hit. Ortiz, walking point, triggered a mine at the river crossing one of the exact locations Elena had circled. The blast tore through his leg, and the medic scrambled to stabilize him while the squad took cover. The terrain funneled them into predictable lines, just as she'd warned. Minutes later, a second detonation. Cole stepped on a newer, low-metal mine, nearly invisible to detectors. Elena recognized the pattern from recent reports, but said nothing as the team worked to clear a safe path. Every mine they encountered matched the circles in her notes. By the time they reached the extraction point, 4 team members were injured, and nearly 90 minutes lost to route clearing. Elena's notebook lay open on a rock, her circles perfectly matching the day's casualties. Underneath, her single line: alluvial deposits preferred for concealment, see imagery 17:30:9b. Back at base, the junior analyst on the intelligence team reviewed the incident report. He found Elena's pre-mission file buried in the digital archive and compared her notes with the actual mine locations. The match was precise. He hesitated, then quietly forwarded her file to the operations staff, flagging it for review. No announcement followed, just a silent acknowledgement as her analysis filtered into the next protocol update. That evening, Elena returned to her gear, methodically preparing for what came next. Her influence was indirect, her accuracy unspoken, but undeniable. The pattern of being overlooked remained, but so did the impact of her work felt in every silent adjustment that followed. At 327, gunfire echoed off the concrete, and Elena's team pressed low behind a shattered barrier. The radio cut out mid-sentence, static swallowing the last word. Around her, operators tapped earpieces and shook their heads as the signal flickered present, then gone. The interference was precise. 30 seconds of jamming, 5 seconds clear, cycling with mechanical regularity. She didn't join the scramble to troubleshoot. Instead, Elena watched the pattern, counting the intervals, and noted the boundaries of the blocked frequencies. While the others tried to reconnect on standard channels, she quietly retuned her squad's radios, shifting them just outside the range of the jamming. Static gave way to clarity. Mitch's voice came through, steady and unhurried. Alpha 2, Sitrep. Elena relayed coordinates and enemy positions, her voice even, as if nothing had changed. The team moved with new purpose. Each time the jamming cycled off, Elena transmitted updates, compressing information into brief, clear bursts. She didn't explain the adjustments or call attention to the new settings. Her focus stayed on the rhythm of the interference, anticipating when it would lift next. The squad's movements grew sharper, their responses coordinated, while other units remained silent or scattered. Command regained patchy comms as the engagement dragged on. Only Elena's squad maintained a consistent link, relaying vital information that shifted the fight's momentum. The operations center requested her radio configuration. She transmitted the sequence without commentary, just a list of frequencies and the timing for each switch. The tech sergeant on the other end blinked at the unfamiliar pattern, but entered the settings as instructed. What he didn't see were the small modifications Elena had made to each radio during routine checks, minor adjustments that allowed access to alternate channels most teams never used. She'd soldered connections, logged the changes in her own notebook, and prepared for a scenario no one else had anticipated. There was no paperwork, no announcement, just silent readiness. By dawn, the jamming stopped. Standard frequencies returned, and officers compared notes about the blackout, attributing the restored comms to luck or heavy enemy EW presence. Elena's notebook sat open on an ammo crate, signal graphs matching each successful transmission. The after-action report credited improvised frequency agility for keeping communications open, but listed no names. The comms officer who briefed command never realized the sequence came from Elena's quiet intervention. 2 days later, battalion orders required all teams to practice alternate frequency protocols. For once, her silent preparation was officially recognized. The training schedule added electronic warfare drills based on the same techniques she had used in the field. The comms chief demonstrated the new procedures as if they were a fresh doctrine, but Elena recognized each step. She sat in the back, cleaning her radio's antenna, listening as the lesson unfolded. Outside, the generators hummed at a steady pitch, the background noise now familiar. Elena checked her equipment one last time, eyes on the radio as the next call came through, urgent, uncertain, and waiting for direction. Leadership, in Elena's world, rarely looked like taking charge. It was the quiet voice that threaded through the static, the careful suggestion that turned chaos into direction. That night, As gunfire pinned the team behind broken concrete, the lieutenant's voice cracked through the radio, panic edging each word. Taking fire from multiple directions can't establish enemy positions. The team scattered, searching for cover, their formation breaking down under the pressure. Elena watched through her scope, tracking muzzle flashes in the darkness, counting enemy positions with steady precision. When the lieutenant's next transmission faltered, Elena spoke, her tone even. Suggest alternate rally point, grid 738,491, defilade position. She didn't frame it as a command. The lieutenant hesitated, then repeated her coordinates to the squad. As the team moved, Elena relayed updates enemy movement. Safe approach routes each observation woven into the fabric of the lieutenant's orders. The squad reached the rally point intact. Breathing steadied, weapons checked, they regrouped behind the natural cover Elena had picked out hours earlier in her notes. The lieutenant's voice grew steady, confidence returning as the situation stabilized. The team never realized the shift in momentum started with Elena's calm direction, not the officer's clipped instructions. Later, at the debrief, the colonel praised the lieutenant's exceptional situational awareness. Commendations followed, the after-action report highlighting rapid decision-making and tactical acumen. Elena sat at the back, her expression unreadable. The lieutenant accepted a Bronze Star, the citation omitting any mention of the radio logs that would have told a different story. 2 days later, the lieutenant approached her at the range, uncertainty in his posture. That rally point you that I chose last week. Why those coordinates? Elena, adjusting her scope, replied without looking up. Overhead rock shelf blocks aerial surveillance. Approach angles limit enemy fields of fire. The lieutenant lingered, searching for words. You saw what I missed? She nodded once, offering nothing further. A week passed. In the next mission briefing, the lieutenant paused, turning to Elena. Captain Vasquez, any terrain considerations we're missing? She offered 3 concise observations, each one integrated into the plan as if it had originated from him. The team noticed the change but said nothing. After the next successful operation, Elena found a folded note slipped under her door. They gave me the medal, but we both know who kept us alive. She burned it in the sink, watching the paper curl and vanish, leaving no trace. The following month, battalion radio protocols changed now. Every suggested rally point required terrain justification, the language echoing Elena's phrasing from that night. The lieutenant demonstrated the new procedure to platoon leaders, her words spoken by another voice. In the next after-action report, buried on page 17, the lieutenant finally wrote, "Critical terrain analysis provided by Captain Vasquez proved decisive." It was the first official acknowledgement. Elena filed the report without comment, then returned to her notes, preparing for whatever the next mission would demand. As the team faced each new challenge, Elena's influence ran just beneath the surface, unseen but essential. The next crisis waited, the kind that would test every quiet calculation she'd made. Rainwater pooled in the bottom of the drainage ditch, soaking through uniforms and chilling the team to the bone. Enemy patrols had cut off the main escape route half an hour earlier, leaving them pressed flat against the muddy bank, breaths shallow and nerves fraying. Lieutenant Hale wiped sweat from his brow, voice barely a whisper. "We're boxed in." A flashlight beam swept close, its arc missing them by a meter before fading into the dark. Elena stayed still, her gaze fixed on the rhythm of the patrols. She marked each pass in silence, counting the minutes between appearances. The first group moved with mechanical regularity. The second, less predictable, overlapped just enough to close gaps. Elena waited, patient, letting the patterns settle in her mind. When the timing lined up a brief window, just enough she leaned to Mitch. Southwest culvert, 30 seconds. Her instructions were precise and quiet, a single plan distilled from observation. The team followed her lead, moving low and fast toward the overgrown pipe half lost in weeds. Elena's hand signaled when to go, her timing matching the guard's blind spot. The culvert's opening looked impossibly tight, but she pressed Ortiz forward, then followed, the others squeezing in behind. The metal groaned under their weight, but inside, the sound dispersed, muffled by the pipe's curves. Elena had already calculated the acoustics. They'd be invisible to the patrols above. Emerging behind enemy lines, the team paused in the shadow of a fuel depot. Sentries clustered at the main routes, just as she'd predicted. Elena pointed east, tracing a silent path along the perimeter fence. They moved in short bursts, each pause matching her internal count of the patrol rotations. Every time she raised a fist, the team froze, boots silent in the grass until the last threat passed. At the final obstaclier stretch of open ground, Elena checked her watch, waited through 2 more rotations, then nodded. The team crossed in the narrow gap between shifts, reaching the extraction point as the helicopter's rotors cut through the night air. Mitch glanced at her, disbelief and relief mingling in his eyes. "How'd you spot that route?" She adjusted her sling, voice even. "Terrain analysis. It was there if you looked." Afterward, analysts reviewed the escape, noting that the enemy's surveillance systems showed static at the exact intervals Elena had flagged as maintenance windows. Her foresight, drawn from careful study of pre-mission reports, had given them the only viable exit. The official account credited adaptive route selection, but didn't say whose adaptation had saved the team. The maneuver entered unit law as Mitch's maneuver. Commendations went to the corporal for quick thinking, the story spreading in the mess hall with each retelling. Elena attended the ceremony, face unreadable, already making notes for future routes. When Mitch tried to hand her the citation, she was gone, her focus on the next challenge. The details of that night filtered into doctrine. Training scenarios began to include timed security vulnerabilities, the kind Elena had documented, now standard practice. The origin faded, but those who'd been in the ditch remembered. In the quiet that followed, Elena set her notebook on the table, pages marked with the same patterns that had guided them out. The room beyond was silent, waiting for what would come next. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the after-action review table, the surface cluttered with mission folders and battered field notebooks. The air carried the scent of stale coffee and paper dust, a familiar backdrop to the routine debrief. Elena placed her worn black notebook beside his elbow and took her seat at the far end, her uniform unadorned, hands ink-stained from weeks of notes. The intelligence officer began the briefing, outlining the operation's failure points: the ambush at the Eastern Ridge, the resupply shortage at Hour 18, the minefield casualties. Slides flicked past casualty counts, equipment losses, each one mirroring warnings Elena had quietly documented. As the officer continued, Hayes flipped open her notebook, eyes moving quickly across the pages. He paused at 3 entries. The first, dated days before deployment, Eastern Ridge surveillance gaps at 34.781 N, 48.901, recommend ground verification. He compared it to the mission report. The ambush location, a precise match. Another page. Ammunition consumption likely to exceed projections by 20% due to elevation and expected resistance. The logistics shortfall occurred at the exact hour she'd noted. Then, a final entry. Security camera maintenance cycles 415, 417, and 530, 532. Culvert at grid 738,000, 491 viable for undetected exfil. The team's escape route and the surveillance blackout aligned to the minute. Hayes looked up, the room growing still as he methodically matched each failure to Elena's predictions. Officers shifted in their seats, glancing at the notebook, then at the slides on the wall. The intelligence officer recognized his department's stamps on reports Elena had referenced, each marked for low priority review. The logistics captain stared at the page where her amended supply calculations had been ignored. Hayes closed the notebook, the sound carrying through the quiet room. He addressed the table, voice even. "These entries are all pre-mission. Every major failurage, supplies, camera gaps was predicted here." He slid the notebook back toward Elena. "Next mission planning begins at 600. Captain Vasquez will brief first." No one argued. The officers collected their files, leaving the table in silence, their glances lingering on the black notebook. The junior analyst paused at the door, eyes flicking from the notebook to Elena, then back again. She remained seated, already turning to a fresh page, her pen moving in steady lines as she began her next set of notes. The hum of the projector faded, replaced by the soft scratch of her pen. Outside the review room, footsteps receded down the corridor, the pace brisker than before. Inside, Elena worked quietly, her focus already on the next operation. Her notebook, now open to a new page, filled with observations, each one a record meant to be read, whether or not anyone was ready to listen. The recognition was overdue, but as Elena wrote, the shift in command's attention signaled something had changed. The next level of review would not be routine. Recognition, when it finally arrived, came quietly. The general's office was lit only by the blue glow of surveillance footage, his attention fixed on a sequence of mission recordings and the stack of Elena's reports beside him. He worked through each case, matching her documented warnings to the moment's disaster struck. The Eastern Ridge ambusher notations had identified the precise rock formations weeks in advance. The ammunition shortfall at hour 18, her supply request, denied by logistics, had predicted the deficit within half an hour. The failed escape router notebook entry about the security camera reboot cycles matched the static blips on depot footage to the minute. Each incident played out exactly as she had outlined, her handwriting echoing in the failures that followed. 8 separate times, her analysis had surfaced before catastrophe. Each time, the paper trail was clear. Elena's reports, time-stamped and methodical, routed through the proper channels and quietly ignored. The general's pen tapped against the desk as he reviewed the final incident, the drainage pipe escape. Her margin notes on camera maintenance cycles had given the team their only window out. Every officer who'd dismissed her work now appeared in the footage, caught unprepared by threats she had mapped in advance. He summoned Elena at 2,100 hours. She entered in fresh fatigues, boots silent on the tile. The general didn't invite her to sit. Instead, he spread her reports across the desk, each annotated with precise coordinates and predicted outcomes. "Explain this," he said, tapping the Eastern Ridge analysis. Elena kept her gaze steady. "Standard terrain assessment, sir. Basalt formations, parabolic reflectors. They amplify incoming sound, dampen outgoing. It's in the geological survey." Her tone was even, almost detached. He moved to her report on enemy patrol rotations. 38-hour cycle. No one else saw it. "It's in the historical logs. I documented the correlation in my submission." Her answer was factual, never defensive. The general leaned back, the weight of 8 missed warnings settling on his shoulders. "Why didn't you push harder?" he asked, not unkindly. "Regulations prohibit repeated submissions without new data, sir." Elena's reply was simple, the words measured. He understood then her silence was not indifference but adherence to a system that rewarded protocol over persistence. Every warning had been filed as required, left to drown in bureaucracy. He stacked her reports neatly, her name printed in the corner of every page. "From now on, your reports come straight to my desk," he said. Elena nodded, accepting the order without visible reaction. No celebration, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement that her work would finally be seen. If you've ever watched your warnings go unheeded or felt your analysis buried beneath louder voices, share your story in the comments. What did you learn from being overlooked? How did you keep moving forward? The next morning, new standing orders circulated. Captain Vasquez's terrain assessments would be mandatory in every planning session. Officers exchanged glances, the meaning clear without a word. The footage, the reports, the outcomes, they all pointed to the same truth. Elena's competence was no longer a secret kept in the margins of her notebook. In the armory, Elena ran checks on a new scope, her focus unbroken. When the colonel sent for her, she entered the planning room and found the conversation had stopped. Officers made room at the table. The map slid toward her, and her pencil marked the terrain just as it always had. Only now, every eye followed her hand. Her observations shaped the plan, and her voice carried new weight. That afternoon, as the next mission unfolded exactly as she had predicted, the general observed from above, making a note in his log. On the operations floor, Elena's pencil moved steadily over her notebook, documenting risks no one else had yet considered. The room was alive with anticipation, waiting for her input. The quiet vindication was not loud or dramatic. It was found in the way every officer now paused when she spoke, and in the silent understanding that her expertise would guide what came next. The morning light in the briefing room revealed a new order. Colonel Hayes called the team to attention, then gestured for Elena to join him at the center table. She set her notebook down, ready to work, as the officers shifted to make space. The map was already marked with notations from previous missions, some hers, some not, but all eyes watched for her first move. Hayes began with the mission outline and stopped. Vasquez, your assessment. The room waited. Elena scanned the map, pencil hovering over 3 possible routes. She spoke quietly, outlining the flaws in each. The northern approach left them exposed to hidden firing positions. The southern edge left no protection from observation towers. The central path too narrow for rapid casualty evacuation. Halsey's frown deepened, but he didn't interrupt. She turned a page and pointed at a thin blue linear seasonal creek bed, dry for weeks, shielded by overhanging rock. This route avoids all known enemy patrols and bypasses the exposed ridges. Entry window is 37 minutes before dawn. Thermal scans show no recent activity. She listed off the coordinates, the required gear, and the timing, each detail unembellished but exact. The operations officer hesitated. That's not on any of our standard approach lists. Hayes cut him off with a nod. That's why we'll use it. He signed off on Elena's plan. The mission launched that night, the team slipping through the creek bed under cloud cover. Enemy spotters waited along the usual routes, their attention fixed on empty ground. Elena's team moved unseen, reaching the objective and exfiltrating without incident. For the first time in months, the after-action report listed 0 casualties. The summary credited innovative route selection. No one named the source, but the shift was clear. When Elena entered the mess hall, Sergeant Cole stood and quietly gave up his seat. The gesture was small, but it marked something permanent. Patterns shifted across the next several operations. Intel officers delayed their reports until Elena had reviewed them. Supply sergeants double-checked manifests against her calculations. Halsey, once quick to dismiss her, now started each meeting by asking, "Vasquez, what are we missing?" The habit spread. Even the most experienced officers waited for her observations before acting. During Operation Blue Note, the change became unmistakable. The room fell silent as Elena listed 5 observations: enemy water storage indicating patrol size, moon phases affecting movement, a sentry's repeated negligence, the timing of resupply convoys, and the pattern of radio blackouts. Each point was accepted without challenge. The mission that followed ended with every team member accounted for and no alarms raised. The record stood: flawless execution, no losses. Her methods became the standard. Checklists she'd built out of necessity now guided every pre-mission review. Her approach to terrain analysis, once overlooked, was quietly adopted by every squad. Maintenance routines, comms, protocols, even the timing of patrol shifts all adjusted to mirror her recommendations. The origin of these changes was rarely discussed, but their effect was unmistakable. The team operated with a new precision, each member aware that small details could shape the outcome. On the eve of her transfer, Elena found a box on her bunk. Inside was a custom scope, her initials engraved in the metal. There was no note, no ceremony, just the tool, perfectly balanced, and a slip of paper folded beneath it. For the quietest shot in the room, she mounted it without comment, testing the reticle under the pale light before dawn. At her final briefing, new officers filled the seats. They didn't know her story, only the results. When she spoke, they listened, copying her words into their own notes. The person least likely to speak was now the voice everyone listened for. With each mission, the new dynamic took hold, unspoken, but lasting. The foundation was set for something more permanent, a shift that would soon reach beyond her own team. Field Annex 17 appeared in the supply room one morning, its pages still warm from the printer. The cover read, proactive contingency protocols, but everyone called them Vasquez rules. There was no announcement, no ceremony. Soldiers tucked the pamphlet into their kits, the same way they'd learned to check their magazines or lace their boots quietly, as if it had always belonged there. What started as Elena's private checklist became the new standard. The results were immediate and measurable. Units that followed her terrain analysis saw ambush rates fall by 63%. Comms downtime during electronic warfare exercises dropped by 78% when her frequency hopping patterns were used. Snipers who adopted her altitude adjustment tables outperformed their peers, marksmanship scores rising by 2 points on average across the battalion. The numbers circulated quickly, and the logic was hard to dispute. No one needed a directive. The teams responsible for the best outcomes were the ones who listened for the quietest voice. Training manuals changed in subtle ways. Recruits at Fort Benning now studied a section titled Silent Surveillance, Detecting Patterns Through Passive Engagement. The text offered no author credit, but the example scenario came straight from Elena's notebook. Instructors paused when they reached those pages, recognizing the style of observation concise, methodical, and quietly effective. In the field, the transformation was even more apparent. Where arguments once filled the briefing room, silence now settled until Elena spoke. Her 5-point assessments, delivered without preamble, became the anchor of every mission plan. The officers who had once dismissed her now waited, sometimes uncomfortably, for her observations before making decisions. Disagreements faded, replaced by a careful consideration of detail. The shift saved lives. Across operations where her input guided the plan, casualty rates dropped. The effect was clear in the after-action reports, even if her name rarely appeared. No one built monuments or handed out medals for the change. Instead, the evidence of her impact was everywhere. Sergeants taught recruits to watch as much as they listened. Junior analysts began to cross-reference data that had once gathered dust. Officers, even those with decades of experience, paused before disregarding a quiet suggestion. The routines and checklists that shaped daily operations now bore the imprint of her thinking, even when the origin story faded from memory. Elena moved to a new posting with little fanfare, her black notebook and custom scope packed alongside her standard gear. The battalion continued refining her systems, each iteration making the protocols more precise. Over time, new arrivals assumed these practices had always been in place. But those who had served with her remembered the first time Colonel Hayes paused mid-briefing, asking for the junior captain's input before proceeding. That momentum, remarkable on the surface, marked the real turning point. It wasn't about policy memos or flawless missions. It was about a culture that learned to value quiet competence. Her legacy isn't plaques or medals, but a culture that finally stops to hear the quietest voice in the room. This is the measure of change that endures when the organization itself learns to listen, and the quietest observations begin to shape every outcome. Quiet strength can change the course of any mission. Elena's story reminds us that the most valuable insights often come from those who speak the least, yet see the most. Think back, have you witnessed a silent leader steer a team through crisis, or watched a quiet observation shift an outcome when it mattered most? Share those moments below. If this story inspired you, subscribe and ring the bell for more tales of unsung heroes in uniform. Share to honor the quiet women in service whose insights save lives every day.